Good afternoon. I am Anatoly Anatolisova, and this is Patriots Must Rise. This episode is, for lack of a better term, a reaction video to Stu Peterson's interview with Laura Logan and an episode of Redacted. The links will be in the description. But these two content providers have unearthed a lot of stuff that just is not in the media. And it's stuff that people need to be talking about. For instance, when is it anywhere in the time since January 6, 2021, the events at the Capitol, that the press has talked about the fact that protesters were being killed? Not just Ashley Babbitt. That this so-called insurrection was filled with the streets having people singing the national anthem. That doesn't sound like an insurrection to me, and I don't think it does to anybody. However, the press has successfully suppressed it to push their narrative. So I think it's very important that people see this. Also, we're not hearing about the fact that Syria has approached the UN to kick the United States out of Syria. Now, I'm not really too sure how the UN would kick the United States out of Syria, but it would be interesting to actually see. I want to flesh out the point that the reason that the United States is in Syria is because Democrats don't seem to actually have a problem with drilling for oil as long as their constituents don't realize that it's happening. So they will not drill on American soil, but they will steal other people's oil without a second thought. That should disturb a lot of people. I wonder how many people died during this occupation. So I got a bunch of stuff that's going to be reacted to in this episode, and I hope that you enjoy it. We also have a story that Redacted uncovered that has CNN leaking a memo that was from the White House as to how the legacy media needs to suppress and spin the Biden administration's impeachment hearings. That should be good.
The U.S. Embassy's website asking for you to lie about what Ukrainians are doing going back to Ukraine to die.
When we were on our break for our little vacation, David and I went camping, and we ran into this young couple. They were like 21-ish, And the next day, like after we talked to him the Friday night we were there, the next day the young girl was like, "Oh my God, I told my mom who I was sitting with," and she was like, "Oh, is it the lovely couple or is it the brothers?" And she was like, "It's the brothers." And so apparently her mom like watches the show pretty regularly. It was pretty funny.
That's great.
That's
the brothers.
great. The
Okay.
brothers.
Well, that's who you just heard from. Philip and David are the brothers. They are our show producers. They're out on the West Coast. We are a married couple. Yes. So we've just been outed for that.
All right, we've got a lot of news to get to here, but we want to tell you about our daily newsletter, which is totally free. We would love for you to subscribe to it. And all you need to do to subscribe is just go to redacted.inc. Again, it's totally free. And we try to bring you a ton of value. So this is not some crappy newsletter. In fact, if you talk to the kids, if you're out camping and a couple comes up to you and says, "Hey, we love Redacted," ask them, "Are you a subscriber of the newsletter?" And chances are they probably are, because it's the first thing that you get to read in your inbox in the morning when you wake up over your cup of coffee. We really try to provide a lot of value, and we cover about 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day that we think you might have missed overnight, provide some additional context that the mainstream media will not give you. We also try to cover some stories you might have missed, like little nuggets of information, and we make sure that we link everything. So all of the stories are linked properly. If you ever want to find out, archived versions of news sources and everything like that is all linked up. We do a great job of really trying to make sure that everything is sourced and linked back to its original source. So it's really a great place to get all of that information. I noticed that more and more news organizations these days simply are not linking to original source material, and it's it's a shame, because I think they're trying to take credit for stuff. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know why they're doing it, but anyway.
They're making shit up. I think there are actually 2 reasons that the mainstream media does not actually cite their work. First, obviously, they're making shit up. Second, I believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, in my mind anyway, we live in a world where the governments of the world do not want you to trust the media. So they don't want to give or lend credibility to themselves.
God's job. But it's not solely God's job. No, it's our job too. We will be the plan. We are never going to give up. When the truth is known to the entire world, we are going to have extreme accountability.
January. The elite want you to believe that January 6, 2021 was some kind of insurrection. There's no coincidence that you've never actually seen footage of the outside of the Capitol where the protesters are singing the Star-Spangled Banner. An insurrection would not be singing at all. And with as many people that were out there, the Capitol would have been taken in seconds. It didn't matter how many armed guards there were, how many bullets were flying. The building would have been taken over, and every congressman would have been dead. They know it. That's why they are pushing the insurrection, because they don't want to be intimidated again.
You've learned a lot more about January 6th. You talked to hundreds of defendants. What have you learned?
Well, first I've learned about pain.
I believe in my nephew. I am proud of him. He was just larger than life.
We wanted to come and kind of just share what really happened today.
He had never been in trouble before in his life, so this was just so overwhelming. I was sitting in my home, and I got a call from his uncle.
What did he say?
They robbed him of his hope, his will to live. They took his fight away from him.
They broke him.
They completely broke him, and they broke his heart.
It's hard to find the truth these days, and it's needed now more than ever. We've traveled the country to bring you honest, accurate reporting.
Bottom line, Laura, if they didn't want people going to the Capitol, they didn't want people even getting close to the Capitol, it never would have happened. It happened because they wanted to happen.
No one was stopping you.
This is the government we're talking about, okay? Like they have like nukes and F-15s. They can do whatever they want to stop average people like me.
34-year-old Roseanne Boylan was one of 4 people killed. This was a woman who got pushed down, smothered, trampled, and then beaten.
Had this been covered at all by anyone else in the media?
No.
They named me as one of the insurrectionists that was preventing the cops from rescuing her.
Was that true?
Absolutely not. This crutch was right at my feet, and I put it above my head, and I said, in the name of Jesus, Lord, please stop this.
Jeremy was at the Capitol providing security.
I mean, he's quite literally the poster boy for the Special Forces.
When you were arrested, they never sat you down and said, is this yours?
No, because they're the same officers that recruited me on December 9th of 2020.
From Department of Homeland Security.
The same 2 guys.
These people are hiding all of this information.
As far as I knew, the only death that happened on either side was a murdered Ashley Babbitt by one of Nancy Pelosi's stooges. The press is obviously suppressing the murders on the outside of the Capitol because it makes the government look bad. We are not in a free nation anymore.
Away with that.
Laura, you broke it.
I'll be here as long as the American people leave me here.
I'm Laura Logan with the rest of the story. Join us.
After watching that, what else is left to be said? I mean, this was an attack on American people that was obviously set up by the American government, a hijacked or occupied country that has ushered in a regime that is willing to murder innocent Americans in order to perpetuate a police state. You've been a war correspondent for over 3 decades. You've seen some of the most horrific atrocities in our world's history. I mean, what other questions, what other information, what's left to be answered, and why is the media ignoring all of this?
Because we know why the media is ignoring it, because it's an inconvenient truth.
The narrative that Ukraine is winning the war against Russia has definitely been a blatant lie. In fact, what you're going to see in the next clip is conversations about Ukraine trying to conscript the people or the men that left Ukraine when refugee status across the world was granted to them. And the footage that I have doesn't talk about it, but there is talk about Ukraine using extradition as if they committed criminal offenses to bring them back. Anybody that's ever applied for a passport knows the international law that if you have committed a felony, you will not actually be granted a passport into another country. These are men that sought refugee status in these countries legally. So you already know that they didn't commit any crimes. And yet the press will probably spin it as they were criminals and extradited back. Don't buy it. Don't buy it at all. Also, America is paying reporters to spin the propaganda that these guys are coming back freely, not by force, to rebuild Ukraine after Russia destroyed it. Don't buy it.
Opportunity for journalists in Poland who want to do the bidding of the United States. So if you are a Polish journalist and you want to get a $50,000 grant from the U.S. Embassy, U.S. State Department, to write propaganda pieces about how Ukrainians are going back to Ukraine to fight and rebuild. Like, will you take that money from the United States to write propaganda pieces? I mean, this is literal propaganda right on the U.S. Embassy's website, asking for you to lie about what Ukrainians are going back to Ukraine to die.
Well, it falls right into the narrative that they want to create, which is like they're going back to rebuild all that Russia has destroyed.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And will you write that piece? And it is, it's very specific on their website, like how they exactly break this down and what they want you to do. $50,000, the total amount available, $50,000. And let's see, the project will support training and content production tailored to Polish journalists on a competitive basis. The project will provide small grants for Polish journalists to develop and execute reporting on the return of refugees from Poland and the rebuilding efforts. So that's right on the U.S. Embassy's website. You can read that right on the U.S. Embassy's website. Meanwhile, what's happening to the women? So in the past 48 hours, the Ukraine has now decided to close the borders for mobilized women. So they can't get their men back. You know what? We need to make sure that the women are being held as well. And they're going through all of that training right now with those wooden guns that you can see here on the screen, because they don't have the guns available for training. So they're giving them wooden guns, fake guns, that they can pretend to play war. So,
okay, common sense check. Ukraine doesn't have the guns to give these women to train with. There are two scenarios here. First of all, Ukraine is the most mineral rich country in the world. That is exactly what this conflict is about. Well, at least part of it. The Donbass region is actually Russia. So, but Zelensky doesn't want to give up the mineral rights. The people have already voted to go back to Russia because they feel that Russia runs things a little bit better than Ukraine. All right. So we've got a mineral-rich country that doesn't have the capability of building more weapons. No, that is a scam to get more money out of the UN, out of NATO, from Zelensky. Also, these are intelligent women that are very angry at their own government. They've lost their family. They've lost their fathers, their husbands, and knowing that these are Cossack women that were trained with a knife, a bow and arrow, and a gun their entire lives. I think Zelensky and his regime are terrified of putting a real gun into the hands of these women for fear of an actual revolt against them, because that's exactly what would happen.
All women in Ukraine who have medical or pharmaceutical educations will be obligated to register with the military starting next month, Zelensky says.
Now they're thinking, I picked the wrong field to go into. I should have been a vet.
I know,
I wonder if that's so that they know how to dole out the methamphetamines.
I find this to be a very patronizing image of like, okay, little girl, you don't get a real gun to train with. I just don't feel like they would post an image like that of a man.
Thursday, we're going to talk about the United States stealing oil in Syria and, of course, meddling in that country, being told, to get the hell out of there. We'll talk about that. We're also going to look at this Biden impeachment proceeding and what the White House is asking the mainstream media to do on their behalf. It's an unbelievable story. I can't believe they would actually send a letter to media organizations asking them to do this. But, hey, it's 2023, so you can't surprise me at all anymore. But
okay, yeah, we can't be surprised about anything an administration that literally stole America would ever do. But we got to keep in mind that America has been in Syria, occupying regions of Syria, stealing oil ever since Barack Obama. The Democrats actually don't have a problem with drilling for oil as long as their constituents don't see it. This is the hypocrisy of the Democrats. So they're literally invading countries that don't want them there, stealing oil. This is the historic optics of the Democrats, but for some reason, people just don't wake up to it.
The United States is illegally occupying Syria, and Syria is now begging the United Nations to please do something about it. Syrian journalist Kevork Almasian joins us to discuss. Thank you for joining it to this bit of news.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be on your show always. Actually, the United States interference in Syria goes back to the 80s and the 70s. They tried to do the coup d'etats in Syria multiple times during the 80s by supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, but most famously because during the era of social media that everybody is speaking about the Syrian case, it started in 2011. They tried to overthrow the government through proxies, and most of them were radical Islamists. So if you believe that the attacks on 9/11 were carried out by Al-Qaeda, if you believe so, the United States was directly supporting these jihadists on the ground in Syria in order to occupy certain areas, and these areas were rich of fuel, oil, and gas fields. And the proof and evidence for that is in 2012, the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States, they prepared an investigation and a report, and they sent it to Barack Obama when he was a president, and they warned him that the active forces on the ground in Syria who are fighting against the President Assad and the Syrian army are the Al-Qaeda affiliates. And they specifically mention eastern part of Syria, which means in Deir ez-Zor and on the borders with Iraq. And they say the Iraqi...
Are you talking about al-Nusra?
Yeah.
Here?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And the report specifies that the Iraqi branch of Al-Qaeda, they are active on the borders and they are infiltrating the borders, and they are also supporting the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda there. So whether when the American side wants to send weapons and ammunition, they're going to end up in the hands of these terrorists. And these terrorists, they occupied the oil and gas fields for a very long time, since 2012 and 2013. And when the Syrian army launched a major military offensive against them, this was in 2018 with the support of Russia and Iran, and they pushed back the ISIS terrorists, because Al-Qaeda later, they had a split between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The leaders were fighting, so there was a split, and ISIS occupied these areas in 2015. The Syrian army managed to push back ISIS from the deserts, and when the Americans saw that the Syrian and the Russian and the Iranian side, they were going to crush ISIS, they have created a new force on the ground called Syrian Democratic Forces. The Syrian Democratic Forces are mostly YPG and the PKK forces, and they're around 60,000 fighters. And these fighters, they managed to occupy the oil and gas fields on the eastern shore of the Euphrates. If you allow me, I will show the map of control over Syria, and I will, just for the audience to know how the Syrian geography looks like today. This is the entire Syrian geography. The red one is controlled by the Syrian army, and the yellow one is controlled by the American forces, and also this green side is occupied by the American forces. If we zoom in just a little bit, we will see that all these areas are full of gas and oil fields, and those are...
I need to make a correction on that. Apparently, according to this Syrian reporter, the American occupation basically happened in the Carter era and has been going on ever since. Now, I have mixed feelings about that, because I subscribe to the idea that if you actually wanted somebody out of your country, you would have done something about it, instead of you're bitching to the UN to come for help. I would have been doing raids for the next 1,000 years, and even coming into America and poisoning water supplies, nuking the White House, everything that I could think of to make sure that they stay out of my country. And that's kind of where I stand with the whole African American entitlement thing, where they seem to think that because they were slaves, they need reparation. Excuse me, you were slaves for 400 years. You had plenty of time to kill off your captors. Stop bitching. You're ashamed of the fact that your ancestors were so weak. That's basically where I stand.
Let's put a fine point on that, because what they're demanding this week is they're demanding a return of the land that the United States occupies and the oil and gas fields of the Syrian state. They're also saying that the U.S. has stolen, the number they put is $115.2 billion worth of oil at an average of 150,000 barrels per day.
Yes.
So the big question here is, what is the United Nations going to do about this? And I think it's a good time to remind our audience that last year, when UN Deputy Spokesperson General Farhan Haq was asked about this, he was very confused when Chinese journalist Denzi Zhu asked. He was like, I don't know, not the same. It was an amazing piece of video.
Yes, Dashi. Couple of questions on Syria. Yesterday, there's a drone attack to a U.S. base in northeast Syria, which resulted in one death and 6 injured. After that, U.S. launched an airstrike, also killed 11 people in Syria. Any reaction from the Secretary General on this incident?
Oh, well, of course, we continue to be worried about all of the continuing tensions, and we are trying to see what can be done to lower the tensions from different forces in Syria, and we'll continue with those efforts.
Do you not to urge everybody to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria?
Well, of course, that's a given, and obviously it's important that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria is respected. At the same time, you're aware of the complexity of the situation of foreign forces, but we call for them to exercise restraint.
But do you think the presence of the U.S. military in Syria is illegal or not?
That's not an issue that we're dealing with at this stage. There's been a war.
But is that because it sounds very familiar. This week we talk a lot about the UN Charter, the international law, and relative resolutions. But it sounds to me a foreign presence, foreign military based presence in another country without invitation sounds like something else to me.
I'll leave your analysis to you. That there's at this stage.
What's the difference between Syria, the situation in Syria and the situation in Ukraine?
There's no U.S. armed forces inside of Syria, so I don't have a. It's not a parallel situation.
You're sure there's no U.S. military personnel?
I believe there's military activity.
Yeah,
but in terms of ground presence in Syria, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, 5 U.S. service members were injured in that attack. If there were no U.S. service members in Syria, how could they got injured?
Thank you.
That's weird, right? Should I ask you about that? And by the way, if you're talking about the resolution, the international law, here is the resolution from Security Council 2254, I believe. It says in its PA paragraph, reaffirming its strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, and to the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations.
Yes, I'm aware of that, and as you see, that is accepted by the members of the Security
Council. But you are not honoring
it. So, again, back to my question, is that illegal to have presence in Syria for the U.S. base?
You were born yesterday, in which case, why are you watching the show? That the media was breathless over the Trump impeachments, both of them. They loved it. They went wall-to-wall coverage on it. The votes, all of it. It was hysterical, right? Now, right or wrong, they are doing the opposite for the Biden impeachment, and the White House sent a memo saying, hey, we think you really should ramp up the scrutiny on the legitimacy of this. Now, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with the White House releasing something about spin. What's wrong with it is that the media already is complying. Roger that, gotcha, as if they work for the Pentagon, which they do. So a few things here stand out to me, like red to a bowl. One, this twist of irony. The Trump impeachment was about a phone call to Ukrainian President Zelensky asking about Biden corruption in Ukraine. Now we actually have that. We have an investigation of Biden corruption in Ukraine and China and Russia and several other places. We should want answers to that collectively. You could love President Biden and want his name cleared. We should, if you do, right? You should want the full story. You should not want to willfully look away. The same way about Trump. If you liked him, you should have wanted the full story about these things to come out, right? We should want equal justice under the law. Now, another thing that stands out to me is that the White House feels so comfortable telling the media how to cover this, and the media just jumping right in, like left foot green, like a twister board. And CNN actually told us this. This is also, I can't figure out their angle here. Why did they tell us?
CNN leaked the memo from the White House because CNN and the other liberal media outlets have no loyalty to the White House. They have loyalty to the cause. And the cause happens to be destroying America. Biden served his purpose. He has done everything that he can in the time that he had to, quote unquote, change America, or fundamentally change America. That's what he actually ran on. Okay, he's been doing exactly what he ran on. So, because of his policies, people, CNN and the DNC really do not want him in office anymore. He's a liability. So I'm actually expecting him to get killed before the election. I'm praying for it, as a matter of fact. That will probably prompt on the ground, or a boots on the ground war in America. But hey, most of us have been dreaming about indiscriminately killing Democrats our entire lives.
The White House is telling us this. Now, I don't want to break my arm patting CNN on the back. They've tried to build their ratings on picking on half of the populace, telling them that they were ignorant for supporting Trump for so long. They also pretend there's nothing wrong with what the president has done. See what they said about this. They said this is their article telling us about the White House memo, and this stood out to me like a bullseye. The Republican House-led investigations into Biden have yet to provide any direct evidence that the president financially benefited from Hunter Biden's career. That's a lie. Republicans have published copious data showing possible corruption that Democrats just put blinders on and refused to see. We've covered them. The Hunter Biden WhatsApp messages where he literally said, "My father's in on this." They have bank receipts from the Biden families. LLCs owned by multiple members of the Biden. We've talked about this, dinners, bank records, and they still have many more subpoenas to go. We linked to those in the newsletter today, so you can go to yourself, if you want to find it, to the Congressional Committee. What would you like to see?
I'd like to see the same title for what they said about Trump when he was getting impeached. I wonder if it was as favorable.
Right. If they had a sentence at the bottom that says Democrats have failed to provide any evidence so far of any wrongdoing.
I didn't find anything like that, and I see it. Now, I think that there's plenty to see here in the Biden corruption investigations if you're willing to see it. It's like fairies. You can only see it if you truly believe, right? In this case, you can only see Biden's corruption if you are a member of the opposing party. That's not how this should work. We should all look at this and leave our prejudice behind. Our inability to do so is hurting us collectively. Here is one of the Congressional Committee chairs this week explaining more the thread they are pulling on Fox News Watch.
What are you suspecting is illegal here that he did? Are you suspecting that he voted for certain policies and pushed certain policies in exchange for money?
He told Ukraine, if you don't fire the prosecutor, you're not getting the money.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they accused President Trump of doing, which he didn't do, and they impeached him over that. He did it, and he did it. Right. Remember, December 4th, 2015, Devin Archer, Hunter Biden are meeting with the head of Burisma, Mr. Zolochevsky, and they called D.C. Now, Devin Archer says, I stepped away. I don't know who they talked to in D.C. Come on. They called D.C., and then 5 days later, the Vice President of the United States, the current President of the United States, goes to Ukraine and starts the process into getting the prosecutor fired.
And he bragged about it on camera.
Bragged about it on camera, but leverages the money of the people I get the privilege of representing in the 4th District of Ohio to make that happen, which directly benefited his son. That's the heart of this issue, those 4 central facts.
So I talked to Shokin. He's the prosecutor that was fired.
I watched him.
And he said he was investigating Burisma. He did think that Hunter and Archer were up to no good. He did say that Joe Biden made Poroshenko fire him. And then tomorrow, I'm going to talk to Poroshenko and see if I can verify that story.
Yep. No, I watched the interview. I think it's important. And understand at the time, our government's policy, that was a turnaround, a quick turnaround of what the State Department and the Obama administration's policy was towards Ukraine.
All right. So now we have a war in Ukraine. That didn't age well, right? That business dealing with Hunter Biden did not age well. We can't just say, oh, it's just one of those things. Happened to like Ukraine, happened to be a fan of their literature and history, and that's why we were doing business there. No, it's not coincidental. Now, here's the memo from the White House to the mainstream media. Here is the heading. It's from the special counsel to the White House. And here is where they tell us exactly what they want. They want the media to ramp up scrutiny of the White House for opening this impeachment trial.
No,
right?
They want the media to ramp up its scrutiny of House Republicans.
Okay, right. They want this to be partisan. It already is.
That's what I was going to point out. I've been seeing coverage on Twitter and on other places, and they're saying the ultra-right, like every time they refer to one of these Republicans, it's ultra-right. Like they're trying to paint them as just insane on the right.
Right. And there's a list of Republicans who have said critical things about the impeachment that they list. It's almost like a call sheet. Like, talk to these 10 Republicans who have, I don't have a screen of that here, but there is, a link to this in the newsletter. Now, can we put that back up? I just want to show you a few more things. Yes. They said, in this modern media environment where everyday liars and hucksters peddle disinformation and lies from everywhere from Facebook to Fox, okay, you fed the media you fed those social media lies. We've seen that. The White House did that. Process stories that fail to unpack the illegitimacy of the claims on which House Republicans are basing all of their actions only serve to generate confusion, put false premises in people's feed, and obscure the truth. And then they said, here's an attachment of 7 lies that House Republicans have told and how you can refute them. That attachment was not provided by the New York Post or CNN, who published this story. I would love to see them. Now, this memo in and of itself is not the biggest sin. The Trump White House made their own requests for how the Trump impeachments were covered, right? And they blocked out media that they thought were unfair to them. They stopped inviting them to the White House. We saw that. But the media was breathless in their coverage of Trump impeachments. They just loved it. It poked holes in CNN's credibility that they have yet to recover from. The same can be said of MSNBC. The same, I think, can be said for most mainstream media outlets. They can't hide their bias with the Joe Biden impeachment, and we absolutely should not expect them to. But when we start to see this, because it is going to get hot and heavy, we know we can look back on this memo and say, you're doing what the White House told you to do. That's not real journalism. Report the story. Yeah. Just that.
If you see it, I mean, this is exactly right. They want to battle against mis and disinformation. And as Senator Rand Paul said, the United States government is the biggest purveyor of dis and misinformation, right? Yes. And you see it right here from the White House, telling people to lie or put spin on stories or discredit what the House Republicans are doing. So mainstream media organizations are like, hey, we picked up this memo. We're carrying the water for the White House. We've got to put these little nuggets in here in these articles. So report it. Report it as fake news. Report it as mis and disinformation.
Don't use those terms. Just report it.
Well, I don't think you have those information.
Misinformation and disinformation, it tells your viewers that you don't think that they can tell the difference between what's legitimately reported. You notice we will never use those terms when we see something. We'll just say,
on Twitter, you can say, I guess you can contextualize it with the community notes, right? So maybe it'll say, like on Twitter, readers have provided context to say, I don't know what they'll be able to do in community threads notes or whatever.
Right. We don't use those terms. We don't think anybody should use those terms. They usually are used to hand-powered a narrative to somebody else. So anyway, let us know what you think of that. And again, keep it in mind as this coverage ramps up, because we're going to see the media being good dogs and doing it just this way.
As I said, this was a reaction video. The point of this video should be very clear. The media has never been honest with us, especially the mainstream media. Do your own research. I stumbled on Redacted shortly after I stumbled on Stu Peterson. And And I met Stu Peterson through Dan Bongino. It's a very tight-knit network of resistance right now. It's an international movement that's growing. And that's primarily thanks to the internet. Freedom is an international concern. And as we saw with the Syria story, not even America is immune from the corruption of occupying another country. So we need to actually speak out. We need to actually make sure that our elected officials understand that we're onto them. It's important in America, Australia, definitely Canada. Trudeau needs to die. As with any tyrannical elected official. I've got the links for the episode for Stu Peterson and Redacted in the description, and I hope you visit them. Subscribe, follow them, tell other people about them. The more people that actually understand what is going on right underneath our noses, the less they can get away with. Who is they? You can call them the deep state. You can call them whatever you wish. The New World Order. Several different names throughout the century. But the reality is, they're very real. They're very corrupted. Always have been. And they feed off of the ignorance of the masses. I am Anatoly Anatolisova. This is Patriots Must Rise. Please like, subscribe. There's a link to donate in the description. And until next time, live free, die well, and love your neighbor as Christ loved you. Unless your neighbor's a Democrat, and then put Tabasco sauce in their Pepsi.